The galactic combat circuits had seen a lot of ridiculous things over the years, but this was something entirely different. You have to understand, when Princess Kaelara of the Thrinic Empire issued her challenge across every known system, most sentient beings assumed it was either a hoax or some kind of elaborate political theater. The Thrinic weren't exactly known for their humility. They were a warrior species who'd conquered 47 systems before their 18th solar cycle. And Kaelara herself had defeated champions from 19 different species in single combat. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, had 4 arms each capable of crushing titanium like wet paper, and her exoskeleton could deflect plasma rounds without so much as a scratch. So when she broadcast her challenge specifically targeting humanity's strongest fighter, most of the galaxy just laughed. Humanity, after all, was the newest addition to the Galactic Council. They'd barely colonized their own moon when the rest of us were building Dyson spheres. They were soft, squishy little things with embarrassingly fragile bones and a complete lack of natural armor, venom glands, or really any defensive capabilities worth mentioning. The betting pools across every civilized world gave humanity approximately 0.3% odds of even showing up, let alone surviving the first exchange. But here's the thing about humans that the princess clearly didn't understand. And honestly, that most of the galaxy still struggles to grasp. They have this absolutely unhinged relationship with the concept of self-preservation, where any rational species would assess the situation, recognize the overwhelming power differential, and politely decline to be pulverized into a fine paste. Humans somehow interpret impossible odds as a personal invitation to do something spectacularly stupid. 3 days after the challenge was issued, a human vessel appeared at the designated coordinates, a neutral space station called the Crucible, that had hosted approximately 6,000 formal combat challenges over the last millennium. The ship itself was unremarkable, just a standard civilian transport with some aftermarket modifications and what appeared to be hand-painted letters on the hull spelling out "Hold my beer." I should mention that this phrase meant absolutely nothing to the translation matrices at the time, though linguists would later determine it roughly translated to "observe while I attempt something inadvisable." The human who emerged from that vessel was Wells. Let me paint you a picture. His name was Malcolm Reeves, and he stood maybe 1.8 meters tall, barely reaching the princess's sternum. He had brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in several rotations, a crooked nose that suggested it had been broken at least twice, and he was chewing something that turned out to be a plant-based stimulant humans called gum. He wore simple training clothes, carried no visible weapons, and when he walked into the Crucible's main arena, he had the audacity to wave at the assembled crowd like he was attending some kind of social gathering. Princess Kaelara was already waiting in the combat circle, resplendent in her ceremonial battle armor, which, by the way, was more for decoration than protection, since her natural exoskeleton was tougher than most starship hulls. She looked down at Malcolm with what I can only describe as profound disappointment, like someone had ordered an apex predator and received a particularly unremarkable houseplant instead. "This is humanity's champion." Her voice echoed through the arena's acoustic amplifiers, dripping with disdain. "I expected someone less pathetic." Malcolm just grinned, and I swear, there was something absolutely terrifying about that smile, though it would take several minutes for anyone to understand why. "Yeah, I get that a lot," he said, stretching his arms behind his back in a way that made several species in the audience wince. "Before we start, quick question. Are there actually any rules here, or is this more of a last one conscious wins situation?" The princess's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "There is one rule, human. When you yield, the combat ends. Otherwise," she flexed all 4 arms simultaneously, each movement creating small sonic booms, "we continue until someone cannot rise." "Cool, cool. Just wanted to clarify." Malcolm started jogging in place, loosening up like he was about to participate in some casual sporting event, rather than face almost certain death. "Hey, you mind if I ask what inspired this whole thing? The challenge, I mean, seems pretty specific, calling out humanity like that." Kaelara's expression shifted as much as Thrinic features could shift, anyway. For just a moment, something flickered behind those multifaceted eyes. Your species has a reputation, she said carefully. The other races speak of you with a certain weariness that seems disproportionate to your actual capabilities. I wanted to see for myself if there was any truth to their concerns, or if humanity is simply skilled at propaganda. Malcolm nodded like this made perfect sense. So, this is basically a fact-finding mission with extreme violence. Essentially. Love it. Totally get it. One more thing. He pointed to a spot near the edge of the combat circle where several humans had gathered, all wearing matching jackets with the words Reeves Fools emblazoned across the back. My friends are going to be recording this. That okay? It's for posterity and also because nobody back home believed I was actually going to do this. The princess made a gesture that her species used to indicate confused acceptance. Record whatever you wish, human. Though I suspect the footage will be brief. What happened next would be analyzed by xenobiologists, combat theorists and traumatized spectators, for years to come. The match began with a standard ceremonial gong, and Kaelara moved first, which made sense, given that she was a trained warrior with decades of combat experience. She closed the distance in exactly 1.3 seconds, which is absolutely blistering speed for something her size, and threw a strike with her primary right arm that should have, by all accounts, turned Malcolm into a thin red smear across the arena floor. Except Malcolm wasn't there anymore. He'd moved, not away from the strike, but into it, sliding past Kaelara's fist with maybe 2 centimeters to spare, and somehow ending up behind her. Before the princess could pivot, Malcolm had actually jumped, using her own arm as a springboard, and delivered a strike to the back of her neck where the exoskeleton plates connected. It wasn't a particularly powerful blow by any objective measure, but the princess stumbled, just slightly, and the entire arena went absolutely silent. Malcolm said, landing in a crouch. Okay, so you do have a weak point there. Good to know. Kaelara spun around, and now there was something new in her expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of focused intensity that made every combat veteran in the audience suddenly sit up straighter. She attacked again, this time using all 4 arms in a coordinated assault that should have been physically impossible to avoid in the confined space of the combat circle. And yet, Malcolm moved like water, like smoke, like he'd somehow mapped out every possible trajectory in advance, and was simply executing a predetermined dance. He ducked under one strike, twisted away from another, actually caught the 3rd arm at the wrist, and used it to vault over the 4th. He was laughing, actually laughing, as he moved, and it was the kind of laugh that suggested he was having the time of his life. You're fast, Kaelara growled, recalibrating her approach. Faster than your physiology should allow. Yeah, we get that a lot too, Malcolm replied, breathing only slightly harder than before. Thing is, princess, humans have this neat trick. We're not the strongest, not the fastest, not the toughest. You've definitely got us beat on all those counts. But we've got something most species either lost or never had to begin with. He didn't elaborate immediately, because Kaelara had changed tactics, launching herself into the air and coming down with all 4 fists aimed at the spot where Malcolm was standing. The impact crater she created was impressive, roughly 2 meters across and half a meter deep. Malcolm, naturally, had already moved, circling around to the princess's left flank. We've got spite, he continued, like they were having a casual conversation over drinks rather than trying to kill each other. Pure, unfiltered, stubborn ass. Every single time the universe tells us we can't do something, every time the math says it's impossible, every time some bigger, stronger, scarier thing tries to put us in our place, we take it personally. Kaelara was breathing harder now, and there was the faintest hint of frustration creeping into her movements. She'd been fighting for nearly 10 minutes, not a long time by most species standards, but longer than any of her previous matches had lasted. Spite is not a combat technique, she said, launching another complex attack pattern. Malcolm weaved through it, and this time when he countered, he actually struck a quick, precise blow to one of the princess's secondary arms that made her let out a sharp hiss of pain. You're right, he agreed. Spite is a lifestyle choice. The technique part is just stubbornness and an absolute refusal to acknowledge when we're supposed to give up. Here's where things got really interesting from a tactical perspective. Kaelara was stronger, more durable, had more reach, more mass, more everything. But Malcolm had done something that the princess apparently hadn't anticipated. He'd turned the fight into an endurance contest, and endurance was where human biology got absolutely weird. See, humans evolved as persistence hunters on their homeworld. They didn't chase down prey by being faster or stronger. They just kept coming, hour after hour, until whatever they were hunting literally collapsed from exhaustion. Their cooling system, sweating, which most species find disgusting, is actually terrifyingly efficient. Their cardiovascular capacity is off the charts. They can maintain aerobic activity at levels that would cause most species to go into shock. 20 minutes into the fight, the princess was visibly slowing down. Her strikes were still powerful, still dangerous, but there were gaps appearing in her defense that hadn't been there before. Malcolm, meanwhile, was still moving with that same fluid grace, still dodging, still landing the occasional counterstrike, still, and this is the part that made several species in the audience genuinely uncomfortable, still smiling. "You're weakening," Kaelara said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "Me? Nah." Malcolm ducked under a haymaker and tapped the princess's ribs in what was almost a friendly gesture. "I could do this all day. Literally. My personal record for continuous physical activity is about 19 hours, and that was during what we call a fun run. This is way more interesting than a fun run." The princess's next attack was sloppier, more desperate. Malcolm caught one of her arms, actually caught it, with both hands, and for a moment they were locked in what looked like a test of strength. It should have been no contest. The princess probably had 50 times Malcolm's raw muscle mass, but the human set his feet, adjusted his grip, and somehow held firm. "Here's the thing about combat," Malcolm said, straining but steady. "Everyone always focuses on the opening move, the decisive strike, the knockout blow. But most fights? Most fights come down to who wants it more. Who's willing to suffer longer? Who refuses to quit even when quitting is the only logical option?" He twisted, using leverage and technique, and probably several principles of physics that shouldn't work with his mass differential, actually managed to off-balance the princess. Not much, just enough to create an opening. And in that opening, Malcolm struck a sharp blow to the princess's center mass that actually made her stagger backward. The crowd was going absolutely insane at this point. Half the species present had never seen a human in real combat before, and the other half had assumed the stories were exaggerated. Watching this small, fragile-looking mammal systematically dismantle one of the galaxy's premier warriors was causing a significant reevaluation of several long-held assumptions about humanity's place in the cosmic food chain. "Yield," Kaelara gasped, and there was genuine shock in her voice. Not because she was beaten, not yet, anyway, but because she was starting to realize she might be. "You cannot sustain this pace." Malcolm laughed, and there was something wild in it now. "Princess, I've been doing martial arts since I was 6 years old. Boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga. I've studied 17 different combat systems, and you know what they all taught me. The fight's not over until someone stops moving, and I don't plan on stopping." The fight had been going for 37 minutes now, and Princess Kaelara was starting to understand something that most species learned too late about humans. They were absolutely terrible at recognizing when they were supposed to lose. Her primary arms were aching in ways she'd never experienced. Her secondary arms had lost maybe 20% of their striking power, and this ridiculous little mammal was still moving, still dodging, still countering with those impossibly precise strikes that somehow found every weak point in her anatomy. "This is insane," she muttered, blocking another of Malcolm's attacks. "Your species is insane." "Oh, totally," Malcolm agreed cheerfully, sweat pouring down his face, but his breathing still remarkably controlled. "We're absolutely unhinged. It's kind of our thing. You should see what we do for entertainment. Half our sports are just elaborate ways to risk death while spectators cheer." Kaelara launched another assault, but her movements were telegraphed now, predictable. Malcolm slipped past her guard and landed 3 quick strikes in succession. Ribs, shoulder joint, the same spot on her neck he'd hit earlier. Each one individually was barely an inconvenience, but the cumulative damage was adding up. The princess stumbled, caught herself, and for the first time since entering the arena, she felt something she hadn't experienced in combat for nearly a decade. Fear, not fear of death. Thrinic warriors were trained to embrace that possibility. No, this was fear of humiliation, of having her entire worldview shattered by a creature that shouldn't even be capable of surviving in her presence, let alone winning. She'd challenged humanity specifically to prove that their reputation was undeserved, that they were just another weak species trading on psychological warfare and luck. Instead, she was getting systematically dismantled by a human who looked like he should be serving drinks at a recreational facility, not competing in galactic-level combat. "You want to know the really funny part?" Malcolm said, circling her now like a predator. "And wasn't that a disturbing role reversal? I'm not even humanity's best fighter. Not even close. There's this woman named Kira Okonkwo who could probably take me apart in about 90 seconds. And a guy named Dmitry Volkov who fights with a style that's basically controlled falling. It's beautiful and terrifying. I'm just the idiot who happened to be closest when your challenge came through and thought, hey, why not?" The princess's mandibles clicked in what might have been disbelief. "You're not their champion, God, no. I'm a freelance security consultant who does underground fighting on weekends for beer money. The actual Earth Martial Combat Federation didn't even know about this match until I'd already accepted the challenge. They're probably watching this broadcast right now having a collective heart attack." Kaelara processed this information and realized with mounting horror that if this was just a random human, not their best, not their most trained, just some enthusiastic amateur, then what were their actual warriors capable of? The implications were staggering. She'd based her entire challenge on intelligence reports, suggesting humanity had skilled fighters. She'd assumed those reports were exaggerated. Now she was beginning to suspect they might have been conservative estimates. "Why?" she demanded, blocking one of Malcolm's strikes, but taking another to her midsection that actually made her wheeze. "Why would you accept a challenge you might not survive?" Malcolm's expression shifted, and for just a moment, the humor dropped away and something much more serious emerged. "Because you called us out specifically, Princess. You made it personal, and humans have this really unfortunate tendency to respond to personal challenges with what we call disproportionate escalation. You wanted to test humanity's strength. Cool. But you did it publicly, with contempt, like we were beneath your notice." That he dodged another strike and countered with a surprisingly gentle tap to her shoulder, almost playful. "That we can't let slide." The fight continued, but something had fundamentally changed. Kaelara was no longer trying to win. She was trying not to lose, which is a very different thing. She was defensive, reactive, burning through her remaining energy reserves just to stay upright. Malcolm, meanwhile, seemed to have found his second wind, or maybe his fifth or sixth wind. It was hard to tell with human endurance. At the 45-minute mark, the princess made a critical mistake. She overcommitted to a strike, leaving her center mass exposed for just a fraction of a second. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He stepped in, closer than he'd been during the entire fight, and delivered a palm strike to her sternum that contained every bit of force his relatively small frame could generate. The sound echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Kaelara staggered backward, then forward, then her legs simply stopped working. She dropped to one knee, breathing in great heaving gasps, all 4 arms hanging limply at her sides. She tried to stand, managed to get halfway up, then collapsed again. The medical scanners embedded in the arena floor started emitting warning chimes. Nothing life-threatening, but her body had reached its absolute limit. Malcolm stood a few meters away, hands on his knees, finally showing signs of serious fatigue. "You good?" he called out between breaths. "Need me to call the medics?" The princess looked up at him, and there was something like wonder in her expression. "How?" she managed. "How are you still standing?" He straightened up, still breathing hard but managing a grin. "Honestly, About 60% spite, 30% muscle memory, and 10% whatever's in those energy drinks my friend Jamal keeps giving me. Pretty sure they're not legal in most systems. He walked over, surprisingly steady considering he'd just fought for 3/4 of an hour, and extended a hand. Hell of a fight, though. You nearly had me at least 6 times. Kaelara stared at the offered hand, then at Malcolm's face, then back at the hand. Slowly, carefully, she reached out with one of her primary arms and took it. The human helped her to her feet, or tried to, anyway. The mass differential made it more symbolic than functional, but the gesture mattered. "I yield," she said formally, her voice carrying across the now silent arena. "The match goes to Malcolm Reeves of Earth." The crowd absolutely erupted. Some species were cheering, others were making distressed noises, and at least 3 different groups were frantically recalculating their threat assessments of humanity. The betting pools collapsed into chaos. Apparently the 0.3% odds had attracted some very optimistic gamblers who were now obscenely wealthy. Malcolm's friends rushed into the arena, all of them shouting and laughing and slapping him on the back hard enough to make him wince. One of them, a tall woman with intricate tattoos covering both arms, shoved a bottle of something amber-colored into his hands. "Dude, that was the most beautiful disaster I've ever witnessed," she said. "The council's going to have questions." "Let them question," Malcolm replied, taking a long drink. "We won. That's what matters." He turned back to Kaelara, who was being attended to by medical personnel, but waved them off impatiently. "Hey, princess, no hard feelings, right? This was just competition." Kaelara's mandibles clicked in what was definitely amusement this time. "No hard feelings," she agreed. "Though I suspect my intelligence officers will be undergoing significant retraining after this." She paused, then added, "Your species is far more dangerous than our projections indicated." "Yeah, we get that a lot." Malcolm grinned. "The secret is that we're too dumb to know when we're outmatched and too stubborn to care when someone points it out. Works surprisingly well as a survival strategy." The medical team finally convinced the princess to accept treatment, loading her onto an anti-grav stretcher despite her protests. As they carried her toward the medical bay, she called back, "Malcolm Reeves, when you return to Earth, tell your superiors that the Thrinic Empire formally requests combat training exchange programs. We would learn from your methods." Malcolm's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously, you want us to teach you how to fight? I want to understand how you won when by every logical metric you should have lost." She managed something that might have been a smile, though Thrinic facial expressions were hard to read. "And perhaps I want to meet this Kira Okonkwo you mentioned. See if she truly could defeat me in 90 seconds. Oh man, she's going to love that." Malcolm was definitely grinning now. "Fair warning, though, she fights dirty, like makes me look honorable by comparison." The princess was carried away, still arguing with the medical staff about whether she actually needed treatment, and Malcolm found himself suddenly surrounded by reporters from approximately 40 different species, all shouting questions in various languages that the translation matrices struggled to keep up with. His friends formed a protective barrier, but one question made it through clearly enough that Malcolm decided to answer. "What message do you have for species who might underestimate humanity in the future?" Malcolm thought about it for a moment, taking another drink while the cameras captured every angle. Then he smiled, that same terrifying smile from the beginning of the match, and said, "I guess just remember that humans evolved on a death world where literally everything was trying to kill us, so we got really, really good at not dying. We're not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, but we're definitely the most annoying to fight because we absolutely refuse to stay down, so if you're thinking about testing us," he raised his bottle in a mock toast, "maybe reconsider, or don't. Either way, it'll be entertaining." The interview devolved into chaos after that, with reporters trying to simultaneously ask about Earth's combat training, human endurance capabilities, and whether the phrase, "hold my beer," had military significance. Malcolm and his friends eventually managed to extract themselves, retreating to their ship where they could celebrate properly without diplomatic oversight. 3 days later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session specifically to discuss humanity's combat capabilities. Intelligence agencies from 17 different species submitted revised threat assessments. The Thrinic Empire formally requested diplomatic meetings to discuss military cooperation, and approximately 600 new challenges were issued to human fighters, because apparently watching Malcolm win had convinced a lot of species that they could do better. They could not, in fact, do better. Over the next year, 43 more matches were held between human fighters and champions from various species. Humans won 39 of them, lost 3, and 1 ended in a draw when both participants simultaneously knocked each other unconscious and the medical teams couldn't determine who'd fallen first. Each victory reinforced what Princess Kaelara had learned in that arena, that humanity's strength wasn't in their physical capabilities, but in their absolute, unshakable refusal to accept limitations. As for Malcolm, he returned to Earth as a minor celebrity, did a few interviews, then went back to his regular job because, and this is very human, he got bored with the attention. He's still fighting in underground matches on weekends, still collecting stories about humans doing inadvisable things in the face of overwhelming odds, still carrying that same energy drink that's probably banned in civilized space. And somewhere in the Thrinic Empire, Princess Kaelara trains with human combat instructors, learning to fight like a species that shouldn't win but does anyway, through sheer spite and stubbornness. She keeps a recording of their match, watches it sometimes when she needs to remind herself that strength comes in forms she'd never imagined. The galaxy learned its lesson that day at the Crucible, though some species needed multiple demonstrations before it really sank in. Don't challenge humans to combat expecting an easy victory, don't assume their fragility means weakness, and definitely, absolutely, never underestimate what they'll accomplish when someone tells them something's impossible. Because humans hear impossible as a personal challenge, and they've built their entire civilization on proving the universe wrong. It's terrifying, it's beautiful, and it's absolutely quintessentially human, refusing to lose until the very concept of losing gets tired and gives up first.